Certainly. I'm Portuguese and I'm European. And I can say also I'm citizen of the world. And I don't think there is a contradiction. There is no contradiction between being someone who is patriotic, who loves his country, I love my country, Portugal, and feel very strongly European as European citizen. Well, it's difficult to choose a moment, frankly. I'm sorry, but it's difficult to choose a moment. Um, when I was young, Portugal was not yet a member of the European Union. Portugal was, in fact, outside of the more advanced societies of Europe. I lived in Portugal still under dictatorship. The revolution in Portugal, the democratic revolution, came only in 74 when I was 18 years old. So, in a way, I could say that my formative moments of Europe were those where I understood that Portugal was not really part of Europe, of democratic Europe, of the European community. Like the death of Salazar, it was very, very small. Or afterwards, colonial war. Or the great moment in my public life that was, and still remains, the 25th of April 74, when we had the revolution for freedom in Portugal. And that was the moment where we felt that Portugal could be part of Europe to its natural place. Because Portugal, as you know, has been in history an important, influential country, but afterwards, during the dictatorship, was not so important, and in fact was very backward. So, for me, the most important moments of relating to European Union were when, as a boy, as a young man, I understood that Portugal was not part of the more advanced democratic Europe. About European Union itself, my most important moment was the accession of Portugal to the European community. It was in 85 and we became a member in 86. At that time I was already state secretary for internal affairs. Afterwards I became state secretary for foreign affairs. So I was already in the government of Portugal when we joined the European community. I was very young at that time, I was 30 years or something like that. And of course, I remember well the signature ceremony. That was before, but our membership started in January 86. So that was probably my most important moment defining the relationship of Portugal with the European community or European Union. In recent European history, probably the most difficult, tragic moment was the war in the Balkans, namely in Bosnia. It was not in the European Union as such. There we are blessed with peace in the European Union since the European community was founded. But in fact it's Europe. And we had wars in the Balkans, namely in Bosnia, tragic. And we also had more recently in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It's also part of Europe. But most tragic from the point of view of war and cruelty and human life losses was in Bosnia and in the Balkans. That was the worst moment in contemporary history from my point of view. I think the fall of the Berlin Wall is obvious from a European perspective. I remember that day very well. Personally, I had the privilege of living a moment that signified a lot for Europe and also for me and for the European Union was when we received the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo in 2012. So it was recognition by the Nobel Peace Prize that the European Union has been a great contributor to peace. And since I was receiving the prize together with my colleagues from the European Council and the European Parliament on behalf of the European Union, of course that was for me the greatest experience of the European Union in a very, very special moment. in historic terms, I would say the most important moment for the European Union was the fall of the Berlin Wall, because it enabled the European Union to reunite. Because until then, we were just part of Europe, the European Union. And today we are uniting all Europe that wants to be part. So, because that's very important. Nobody is a member of the European Union against its own will. Okay. From that point of view, for the reunification of Europe, I prefer the word reunification to enlargement. I think the fall of the Berlin Wall was the most important moment. But in terms of a festive moment, a moment of commemoration, and probably because I was on that moment, and I feel it strongly, when we received the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo for the European Union, and on behalf of the European Union, that was for me probably the most, let's say, impactful moment. The most important moment in my life, from not from a public point of view, from a political point of view, was 25th of April 1974, Portugal. And that shapes everything. Because I was 18 years of age and I saw a dictatorship that lasted 48 years crumbling, and the possibility of freedom, that I considered together with peace the most important value. So, for me, the fall of the Berlin Wall resonated especially because I'm from that generation that saw not only my country but Southern Europe finally coming to freedom, Portugal, Spain and Greece. And that moment was essential for what happened later. By the way, Samuel Huntington, that is very much mentioned because of his book Clash of Civilization, he has another book about I think the third wave, when he says how Portuguese transition to democracy and Spanish had such an impact in Latin America, because at that time almost all Latin America was dictatorship. It was not only Cuba, almost all Latin America was dictatorship. And the fact that Portugal and Spain became democracies had a great impact there. And also afterwards, of course, in Central Eastern Europe. So for me, the fall of Berlin Wall resonated very strongly because it was like my experience when I was 18 years old of democracy and freedom coming to my country. And for those people who were thinking that forever Eastern Germany and the eastern part of Central Eastern Europe will be under totalitarian rule, that came to an end. So it was a great moment. But I also remember the movement of Solidarity in Poland with great emotion. All those movements I was following very closely, because I always thought they were going to happen. Because my point is that if there is the opportunity, if you let people choose, they choose freedom. They don't choose dictatorship. But you have to let them choose, of course. I think the most important thing is this opening horizons, traveling, being able to establish yourself where you want. Now, for instance, I'm here in London, benefiting for some days more at least before Brexit of the freedom of movement and freedom of establishment. Of course, we are going to find some solution in the future. But you see, for me personally, once again, remembering my experience and the experience of my parents and my family before the revolution, and the Portuguese accession to the European community, the European community and the European Union enlarge our horizons. We are citizens of something that is bigger than our country. And that is the greatest advantage, I think, for my generation and for other generations. probably new generations they don't even notice it, but it's a very important change. By 2030, I would like to see the European Union really more united in the fields of foreign policy and security, to be a real global player with power, projecting its power, it's defending its interests and its values, our values. I think what's happening in the world is very dangerous today, very unpredictable, and to have a strong European Union, not only in the field of trade or competition as we have today in those fields because they are fields where the European Union has real power, but on other fields where the member states retain the key words, in fact, we do not exist so clearly globally. So for me, I don't believe we are going to have the United States of Europe in the foreseeable future. Maybe it will be good, but I'm not sure. And so realistically, what I'd like to see by 2030, if I'm still around, is a European Union that has no complex when it discusses with the United States or with China or with any other power, and it is able to defend its values and also its interests. So a real united Europe in terms of foreign policy, security, as an important global power for a common good, not with national chauvinism, but precisely for a global order based on the principles of peace and freedom, and basically the defense of human dignity. There is no global order, there is a global disorder. And so, even if you think statistically, you are better in almost all indicators today, from life expectancy to child mortality to literacy. The world is in a better situation today than it was 20, 50 or 100 years ago, no doubts about it. The reality is that besides other challenges, like of course from a planetary point of view, the problem of climate change, the reality is that the risks of accidents and dangers are bigger today because there is a global disorder. And so I think the European Union could give a contribution and should give a contribution to a more, let's say, stable, peaceful and prosperous world community. That's my point. Including on issues of global governance like climate change, financial stability, besides of course peace. So these are issues that require a global effort that cannot be dealt with at national level, obviously not. It's impossible to deal with those matters at national level. Climate change cannot be controlled at national level, nor financial stability. It has to be done across countries. It could take the lead. For instance, it was the European Commission, it was my commission that put forward at that time the most ambitious program to fight climate change. It was in 2007 our program for the so-called 20-20-20, reducing of greenhouse gas emissions. At that time, our American friends or the Chinese were completely against that. The Chinese afterwards made some evolution, but in fact it was almost only the European Union, 2, 3 or 4 countries more that, for instance, were implementing the Kyoto Protocol. So we were completely isolated at that time on the climate change. Some people even were pretending that the problem did not exist. It was the European Union. It was the European Union, in fact. The UN is, of course, we are committed to the UN because it's a global, the institution that represents the globality, so by definition, universal, let's say, institution. But the reality is that to move, we need some people take the lead. It's very difficult in UN to do anything, having at the same time to convince, because decisions taken by when we still have the veto mechanism, or where the consensus requires to have, let's say, the United States, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, only these countries. So we need one country or group of countries to lead. And the European Union, I think, is in a position to lead. It has the means to do it. It has to have the will and the capacity. But we have the means. The means, I mean, its dimension, and also the resources, the economic, intellectual, critical resources. We have the means to lead. To lead, not only for the sake of the European, but for the sake of some global goods. And so, of course, ideally it should be everybody, but someone has to take the initiative. And so either it's the European Union, or it is one or two other powers that, with all respect, I don't think they have the same commitment to the values that we have. When I mentioned non-imperial empire, I meant precisely that. A non-imperial empire. It means a political entity that has the dimension of an empire, but it is not imperialistic. Empires, like we had many in Europe, from the Roman Empire to Napoleon Empire to many others, they had something in common. They were established by force. There was a center imposing its will on the rest. European Union is different. That's why I call it non-imperial. No one is in the European Union against its will. Countries have to ask to become a member, and they remain if they want. But at the same time, we are certainly bigger than our countries. That's why I said it's because we have a dimension today in Europe that is bigger than some of the past empires in Europe. That's why I think it's more than one country or a simple group of countries. There is some kind of organization there, but it's non-imperial. Not only because it is not established by force, with the center imposing its will on the different members, and also it has not the goal of dominating others by force. The European Union today has no ambitions of colonialism or imperialism. That's why I call it non-imperial empire. That was also a little bit of provocation to think about our dimension. But at the same time saying, but we are not going to do that like the empires of the past, to dominate our populations or populations of other parts of the world. See? And that moment that created some discussion. I think I never received so many insults coming from Britain as at that moment. There was some discussion. But I think it's important that Europeans think about the dimension they have in the world. We are in fact, if you look at the United Nations, when we vote in the United Nations, it's in fact more than 35 countries that vote the same way, because it's the European Union members plus the candidate countries. It's by far the most coherent group in the United Nations. The so-called 77 group has nothing compared with our coherence. So in fact, if the European Union is aware of its influence, it can do much, much more, keeping it unimperial. So not with any kind of imperialistic ambition that will be not only fair, but also almost ridiculous. First of all, I don't believe we are going to see disintegration. I think the European Union is going to continue somewhere in an incremental development. Neither disintegration nor the United States of Europe foreseeable future. It's going to become something between neither a state nor an international organization of the classic intergovernmental type. And some people have difficulties in adapting to that idea because they think only in terms of states. Even when they say United States of Europe, with the best intentions, they are thinking in terms of a state. And we should not. We should think about other forms beyond the state. So the European Union, I think it's going to continue that path, incremental path, sometimes frustrating, fragmented, time-consuming. But there are risks of disintegration, certainly, and we should not be complacent. The biggest risk to Europe, European Union as such, of course, it is a nationalism, extreme nationalism. Because the European Union is a political entity based on supranational, cross-national, transnational principles. So the threat of nationalism, of course, is the one that could put in question the very foundations of the European Union. Populism, nationalism, chauvinism, xenophobia, all these, from my point of view, negative, extremely negative developments, they could do harm to the European Union. To our member states, they are doing harm, but in principle, in our countries, even when people rebel or go against their governments, they don't put in question the country themselves. While the European Union has always an issue of legitimacy. And so nationalism could undermine the legitimacy of the European Union. So for me, that's the biggest threat to the European Union as a political construct. But ever closer union does not mean that we lose our identity. On the contrary, I don't see any contradiction, frankly. When I keep my identity, but if I'm in love with someone, it's a closer union I want with that person, but I don't mean to destroy or to destroy the identity of that person. We are closer, but it does not mean that. So, and that's the originality of the European Union. In fact, it's unity in diversity. And I think, in fact, that's the best way to give value to our differences, is to be united. One thing I know from realpolitik point of view, I had the privilege, because of my political experience, of being, for instance, in the G8 or the G20. When it comes to take global decisions in the world that have a real impact, we have basically the United States and China. This is the reality. Russia, in some matters, tries still to show it's still a power. But at least economically, we have the United States, China, and Europe, if Europe is united. Because even the biggest European countries, the biggest economy like Germany, it's not at the same level of the United States or China. So the only way for Europe, for our countries to matter globally, if they want to matter, we can say it's not important. We can be out of that. The world is not important. Okay. But if you believe the world is important, if you believe the global community and mankind is important, we should like to have some influence to project, to defend our values. The only way to project that influence for a European country is uniting with others. If not, what is the power of Portugal in a global negotiation? It's my country. I would say 0.000. Portugal cannot change the world alone. But Germany also cannot do it. Or France. Or together, the European Union has a very good chance of projecting its values. That's why I think there is no contradiction between national identity, culture, patriotism and supranational identity. The problem was that my generation, in my country, we were not yet in the European community. So we saw that as a project, in some cases even as a dream or an ideal. Generation today, most of them, they have lived that. So it's normal, they take it for granted. It's very common to say that the new generation gives less importance to this. I don't agree. I consider the new generation much more prepared than the previous ones. And there is always what I call the generational optical problem. If you look at Hammurabi, almost 2,000 years before Jesus Christ, they say there, the new generation does not know how to behave, they don't respect. So there is always the idea of generation that the new generation is not so well as the former. I don't agree. I think the new generation is much more prepared than my generations or the generations before mine. In objective terms, in literacy, in everything. Namely, in openness. Today, a child today, or a young man or a young woman, they know more about the world. They travel much more. By the way, I consider traveling a good thing, not a bad thing. Because apparently today there are people they don't want us to go by plane or to go by sea. I don't understand why. I think that's a great project of a great progress of mankind, that to travel, to go out of one place, and to go as far as people can. I think this generation is in a way more European than the previous generations, no doubts about it. But being more European does not mean that they know by heart the history of Europe or the Treaty of Lisbon or the documents of the European Commission. It's because they are naturally pro-European, naturally European. And that's the way it is. And generally speaking, the younger people are more open than older people. That's the reality. Older people don't like to listen to that, but that's true. On average, younger people are more open in Europe than older people. They're more open to new ideas, to new projects, to important challenges. They are less nationalistic. They are more internationalistic. Like we've seen in Britain during the referendum. They are more open to new generations. It's a pity that sometimes they don't go vote. Maybe that's another issue. I think what's happening is a result of many factors that, by the way, are not specifically European. When we see populism from Americas to Turkey, to China, to Asia, to Latin America, it has nothing to do with European construction. It's basically a reaction to change and to globalization. And they are people that, with the older generation, by definition, they are more defensive. And the younger generation, in principle, they are more open. And that's a biological cycle. And when society tends to be more defensive, they tend to close against outside, against outsiders, against foreigners, against a more international vision. They are more defensive. So it's not a specifically European problem. You have, in sociological terms, quite good evidence that, for instance, in the United States, the older people, they are more protectionist and more nationalistic than younger people. And so that's why I think we should not just think about that in European terms. To a large extent, it's an effect of globalization. Because globalization is putting in question many of the national boundaries. People understand that those boundaries are not effective to protect us against some what is perceived as some threats or challenges, and so they become more, in the case of Europe, more Eurosceptic. They want the state, the nation state, to protect them. Okay, in other countries that have no European Union outside, it's not against the European Union. They turn on, but they turn against foreigners or against something else. For me, it's a deeper problem that's going on, and I've seen that in many parts of the world, not only in Europe. And the generational gap, I think we see it also in other parts of the world. So, in terms of being more open or not. Being said that, there are young people that are very, very nationalistic too, and we should not underestimate those risks. But on average, I think sociologically, I believe that younger people are more open than older people, and that's understandable.